On one hand, I'm sorry because we're in this strange situation where tomorrow, actually today, East Coast time, is going to be 20 days after June 13th. And, there's a zero on that. And I think that has to do with the reminder that I was expected to help hook up legal marijuana. And I'm not going to do that. But I want to bring up a matter. Something disturbing also happened recently. The Supreme Court opined on a case that, among other things, discussed the matter of certificates and claims associated with holding of those certificates and being able to be availed of the benefits of property associated with the holding of those certificates. Not so ironically, last year I composed a response to an article discussing an opinion of former Justice Antonin Scalia that I evaluated in the context of a consideration of the Bank of the United States and actually the beginning of the process of the United States creating paper money and also engaging the first stock issue specific to an understanding that the manner in which the first currency was issued in the United States was based upon a discounted repurchase of or a discounted purchase of certificates that had been given to people who provided for the war effort during the Revolutionary War. And those certificates that were purchased by members of the government at a value discounted from what had originally been assessed as the value of their contributions to the war effort were then redeemed at face value in the form of stock issues provided by the Congress that were then sold, including and specifically to people outside of the United States. There was a very specific process engaged regarding the first issues of stock by the United States, including a specific kind of incentive regarding participation in the first stock issue with an expectation of repurchase, but also a consideration of risk all the way from the very beginning. A kind of speculation that no one else had ever done. It kind of fit in with what was understood to be the manner of the United States and the early colonial administrators representing themselves abroad in terms of what America had to offer. But the point was that what really went into that was a massive undervaluation of the people that actually provided for the war effort. And not only that, but the consideration of what it meant that most of those certificates were issued in regards to provision of armaments. Yeah, people provided things that were actually rations or were actually used by the colonial army, up to and including actual weapons. So the consideration I had had is, well, if you agree as part of a national defense effort or in support of a resistance to tyranny, or in an effort to engage in a support that ends up involving the use of your property, including in consideration of it as an armament or in the construction of an armament, what are you entitled to by virtue of your contributions to your country? And this brings up a variety of different issues, including the relationship of representation, but also in consideration of the fact that the first stock issues of the United States were redeemed as and insofar as it involved provision of arms for the war effort. And so last year on July 4th, I read this article. And in reading this article, I wrote some information. But before I get to that, I want to read what I had written on July 4th of 2019. I have it right here. Is it possible that I was again given an award for my investigations and reports on fraud, and there are efforts to attempt to dispossess me of legitimately acquired recoveries for my investigative efforts? I believe there was a recovery from Chicago. I believe this is why the report numbers were deleted from my email, and instead, what I was provided was a boilerplate response to hold the time and date marker and obscure the fact that report numbers were issued to me and not to some other entity. I attempted to report this as soon as I found out about it. If someone attempted to use my letter to the Supreme Court of Texas about my concerns about the performance of the Attorney General in my interim positioning, then know that A. The state of Texas, via the judicial branch, never provided me with an appropriate procedure through which to officially submit evidence in accordance with the responsibilities and chain of evidence necessary to effectuate that role. B. The state of Texas never provided me with official means by which to acquire the financial resources to verifiably submit legal filings or pay for attendant fees, research materials, equipment that was protected from spying or remote access that would assure client confidentiality, including me as I represented myself pro se, or any method by which to engage the process of filing formal charges in connection with another person that would also have included an investigation into and filing of charges against others engaged in legal practice in Texas, such as attorneys, judges, and administrators of the state's Bar Association, which operates under the authority of the approval of the Texas legislature and governor. As such, if there was alleged to be any implicit agreement that awards that I obtained for efforts in other states or in the state of Texas were to be awarded to official government or other departments of the state of Texas, then I contend they breached their own contract by failure to provide the necessary and specifically required assistance to justify their performance of the contract to be legitimately entitled to do so. At the same time, I've been repeatedly and continuously trafficked for almost the entire time I've been in Texas. I've thus far received no official support from any state agency or department. On the contrary, every effort I have made to engage law enforcement in an effort to receive assistance with extraction from trafficking has been met with appearances of either a lack of knowledge of the legal requirements of how law enforcement has to act in such circumstances, or efforts to divert me back to the very networks that are aiding and abetting my traffickers. I still contend that the observation at the Neuropsychiatric Center in West Oaks Hospital are acts of kidnapping, as the most basic legal requirements for a mental health hold were egregiously violated. In fact, under international conventions against torture, to which the United States is signatory, they actually constitute acts of torture. That no less than 3 mental health facilities that serve youth were shut down for serious and egregious offenses involving the safety of children and minors since I first requested assistance, and was provided with none, is further proof that there are in fact serious problems with the Texas mental health services system. Law enforcement officers are required via the Texas Occupations Code to have certification that they have received at least 4 hours of anti-trafficking training. This entails more than attempting to compel women to voluntarily submit to mental health analysis, treatment, and potential medication before they are able to file an official police report and receive a contact for follow-up. This impacts not only the certificates themselves, but also the funding for the training programs. The certificates may be connected to other securities that the state of Texas uses for its financing efforts. They would also be a part of the inventory of required training necessary to substantiate employment requirements for law enforcement officials. That in turn impacts evaluations of their job performance and statistics related to officer compliance. And that would impact any financing portfolios for services or other needed appropriations or allocations for law enforcement agencies or departments. Failure to comply with the requirements of the certification and actively assist people who have been trafficked is not only fraud against those involved with financing those programs or any programs that rely on accurate data for officer duty performance, but also lend credence to charges that law enforcement officials are themselves aiding and abetting acts of trafficking while on the job. The state of Texas also has an anti trafficking task force that is set to expire on September 1st, 2019. During the time I've been in Texas, I have had no evidence that the various departments in Texas that would be involved in any anti trafficking efforts have actually been engaged in anti trafficking efforts. On the contrary, despite having numerous accumulations of evidence stolen, I at this time have evidence that instead efforts to contact law enforcement or members of the Department of Public Safety in regards to allegations of acts of trafficking have been intentionally prolonging or sustaining the trafficking scenarios in order to commit acts of fraud that impact the pension system, as well as other departments that would need to be included in an appropriate and comprehensive interdiction effort. This is not to be mistaken as an effort to investigate and report on crimes while being extorted into complicity with them using access to basic resources. Humiliating a homeless woman, stealing her legal research and investigative notes, and refusing to assist her with obtaining legal documents, while instead using her reporting efforts to set up securities for sectors that she could otherwise have been legally and gainfully employed in, are serious crimes. The gravity and escalation of the risks engaged and the prolongation of their engagement qualifies as an organized crime syndicate. For RICO, you only need twice in 10 years. There are numerous crimes that have been repeatedly engaged in this pattern of racketeering in now 4 cities in Texas combined that demonstrate an active agreement to participate. The profundity of the crimes is such that a clear chain of responsibility needs to be explicated. To practice diversion tactics on a person seeking assistance with attempts at reporting and quashing a nexus of extortion in an effort to frame her for other crimes is itself a crime. If there was a legitimate award for recoveries at any point while in the state of Texas in connection with any of my reporting efforts while in Texas, then efforts to continue to traffic me to prevent me from accessing the documentation of the results or to be able to maintain access to identification documents or safe places to store evidence so that I may enter the appropriate facilities as obstruction and worse. I have not ever been acknowledged officially by any department as being an employee for them during this time. I have also not ever been officially charged with any crime. There's no legal justification for denying me personal access to my recoveries or awards. On the contrary, preventing me from being able to acquire income or other means by which to provide for myself has served to further efforts to traffic me, tamper with evidence, and sabotage the results of the investigation. Finally, I did file a report with the Texas Board of Insurance Commissioners. Via Texas law, the jurisdiction for investigation proceedings concerning the Texas Department of Insurance is with the Commissioners Court of the Texas Board of Insurance. It is a separate process than the judicial or legislative process. It is fraud against the Texas Department of Insurance to attempt to divert or otherwise justify further extortion involving any other state process to deprive me of a direct and official response from the Texas Department of Insurance. If any other department in Texas has attempted to access my efforts to report to the Texas Department of Insurance in such a manner as to obstruct that investigation or preclude an investigation and award from that department, then it is itself engaged in acts of fraud that can impact the insurance connected to that department. My efforts to contact the Texas Department of Insurance were directly connected to allegations concerning the events that transpired in regards to my kidnapping at the Neuropsychiatric Center. The truth of the matter is that to this day, I've been provided with no information about the billing for those 10 days, no information about the medical records access in connection with that event, no paperwork demonstrating that the staff engaged the detention in a manner that complies with policies necessary to assure its legality, no documentation that they prescribed me medication in accordance with legally required procedures in order to bill for or distribute a controlled substance, and no information on how or by whom the detention was paid. I also have received no response to the fact that I was deprived of shelter, housing, employment opportunities, identification documents, evidence, personal work products, other personal private property, and had my education efforts interfered with after having to delay the start date and enter school with questions regarding my credibility due to allegations of mental disability. All of these matters are ones that justify and demand restitution. If I am a whistleblower, then by law I am entitled to 20% of whatever the recovery is in connection with the aspects of my investigation, as until now I've received no official government assistance. If I am not to be considered a whistleblower, then I'm entitled to treble the damages. This is the law. The aspects of my efforts to report to various state agencies are one thing. The efforts at filing legal filings pro se via the various court systems is one thing. And the effort to have an investigation and recovery engaged via the Texas Department of Insurance is another. As for whatever occurred in regards to anything connected to Chicago, My effort on behalf of officials in execution of their administrative or ministerial duties to agree to cooperate with diverting any recoveries or results of my investigation between states shows an interstate agreement. That makes this a federal trafficking case. The only appropriate law enforcement is federal law enforcement, and the only appropriate court would then be federal. It also qualifies as a form of public corruption and should be addressed as such. If there was any concern about me making legal arguments or investigating matters in connection with children or minors, recall that it was for an attempt to report child abuse that I was kidnapped. What does it mean that rather than accept a report on child abuse at a domestic violence shelter, I was illegally detained in 2 mental health facilities that ostensibly provided treatment to children and minors? This case is not closed until there's an official response that accurately recharacterizes the situation for all of its profundity. Now, I wrote this on July 4th of 2019. I acknowledge that at the time I considered these to be a particular kind of crime that had international implications. The point of the matter is, to this day, this still stands. And not only that, I recently found that rather than the Texas Board of Insurance responding to me per a specific and formal process that is a part of and is outlined in the Texas Insurance Code itself, including a requirement to formally respond to the kind of request that was made within a specific period of time in connection with actual law regarding securities and insurance in the state of Texas, that what happened was instead I was trafficked out of the place where I lived at the time when I was made homeless and forced to flee that city for another city where I was homeless for over a year. And in that time frame, what the Texas Insurance Board did, or the Texas Board of Insurance Commissioners did, was release a report specifically time and date stamped to occur in connection with the anniversary of my reporting efforts on workers' compensation for domestic workers. My understanding is those domestic workers can also include people that provide in-home health care. That would be the kind of women I was in the shelter with, that I was attempting to get someone to acknowledge were being subjected to extortion and requiring them to receive prescription medication for their children just in order to stay in the shelter. Now, I understand in the state of Texas that workers' comp claims have a very specific relationship when it comes to risk and managing risk associated with the Texas gas and oil sector. But it is important to understand my charges were specifically that women and children were being subjected to efforts to extort them to agree to cooperate with crime while they were being used for illegal purposes by corporations or entities that were labeling them as assets. This was all part of what was supposed to be addressed formally and in consideration of an actual case. It was not meant to sign me up as somebody's prized pony to traffic all over the state of Texas in connection with very serious and egregious crimes. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just me in the state of Texas attempting to take that and put it into a book through the Insurance Commission, or rather a report through the Insurance Commission concerning workers' compensation for domestic workers. Would that be considered a part of somebody's understanding of a recovery? This is the most profound thing that I have found. As a matter of fact, it is dated for, if I'm not mistaken, July of 2019. The anniversary on that report will be coming up soon. Nobody ever contacted me. Nobody ever responded. I filed with the court after I changed my address, including a form with a change of address. I have been in Texas now going on 4 years. It will be 4 years on November 1st that I have been in Texas. To this day, 5 years actually, on November 1st that I've been in Texas. To this day, nobody's responded. I have another thing that I wrote last year which would have actually been an argument that more than just advocating for myself or on my own behalf as I did the year before, would actually have presented what I believe would have been an actual substantial constitutional argument, specifically in consideration of if we in those shelters were actually used as part of some sort of experimentation process, whether it was merely regarding behavioral economics testing in association with our resource acquisition, up to and including healthcare and up to and including prescription of controlled substances, or if via our intercession with the public services sector we were also used in R&D for the development of products including that which would be identified as defense articles, up to and including actual R&D in relationship to the construction of weapons, then what are we entitled to as restitution or compensation insofar as that's the case? My contention is there is more now. There is now going on more than 10 years worth of official acknowledgement, including through the Supreme Court of the United States, that that's exactly what's happened in this country. That people were literally used as human test subjects for a number of products, up to and including defense articles, or what actually qualifies legally as a weapon. Without informed consent, this means one thing, but even with informed consent, what does this say about the value of our country and the value of our people if we will use our own people in the creation of these kinds of products and will also make them for sale internationally without acknowledging the contributions of those from whom the research, development, and actual property was originally acquired? This goes all the way back to the founding of the United States. This goes all the way back to the first currency issue and the first stock issue by the United States. There have been two efforts in the history of the United States to incorporate a bank, an actual bank of the United States. I contend that what has been going on in the last year has been comparable to the constitutional arguments, including a constitutional argument made by former presidents of the United States, former secretaries of state of the United States, and including in a manner that actually saw a sitting president successfully be impeached. A president of the United States was actually impeached for circumstances comparable to the ones we're dealing with right now. I contend that we are being highly undervalued, and that we are going through this period of time in the manner we are, and our considerations of constitutional redress in the face of what we are being exposed to is very disingenuous and needs to be addressed directly and immediately.